So today's summer reading craft is actually going to be showing you some basics of watercolors. And included in your tote, you have a watercolor palette and a template, which is a rose. You also have 2 pieces of watercolor paper and some graphite paper. So today, just to get started, you're going to go ahead and grab your watercolor paper. You'll need a pencil. And all you need to do is take your graphite paper and put it so it's ink side down onto your watercolor paper, just gently. And then you're going to go ahead and put the rose on top so that you can see it. Okay, now this is important. You are going to be transferring this rose to your watercolor paper because we don't want it to be overwhelming. We want to do it very lightly. Instead, it will just be a very light outline. So the way to do that is just to hold it in place. You can tape it if you want. I find it's just easier to hold it in place and then just very gently start your outline. If you're not sure at this point how dark it is going to be, do a little bit and then without moving anything, just go ahead and kind of lift up the corner of the graphite and just kind of see what it's looking like underneath. And I am already seeing that that's a little too dark, so I'm going to go ahead and adjust, because this is, it's a very sensitive graphite paper. You don't need to press very hard at all. So I'll adjust that by making it even lighter. Take another look. Okay, so that is definitely better. I could make it even lighter still. And don't worry about if you do end up pressing too hard, you can also use an eraser just to kind of erase some of the lines and make them lighter themselves. We'll continue. Again, I'm not quite sure how much of this area I've already covered, so I'm just going to take a quick look. With nails, I'd probably be able to do this. Okay, so that's good. I've made sure that I've done most of this area. I'm just going to continue now. Okay, I'm going to lift it up one more time to see. Okay, that to me looks about right. Then you would just go ahead and gently lift off the graphite and the template, and you're now left with your watercolor paper, and the design is right there. Again, this is the point where you want to adjust it. If you are thinking it's a little too dark, I'm thinking here I would like to make this a little less dark, probably here too. You want to do this now. You want to get an eraser and go ahead and make any adjustments now, because as soon as we start adding water, it's going to lock in that graphite and you won't be able to erase it from there on in. So the next step for our rose, instead of putting the colors straight on to the watercolor paper with our rose, we're actually going to start looking at mixing colors and sort of choosing a palette from the colors that we have. Just like, when you're in school or if you've taken any art classes, just because we have these colors does not mean we can not make all sorts of other colors. And with watercolors especially, adding the amount of water is going to change it from being a very dark to extremely light washed out color. So for this, we're going to be using pinks and reds and greens and some yellows just to kind of create a variety of different colors. So I'm going to use the green first, and I'm just going to kind of look. And if you have, I'm using parchment paper here, but you can use, if you already have an actual watercolor palette, or if you want, you can just use a plate, a Tupperware lid, anything at all, just so that you can kind of see the colors and add water, kind of gradients of pigment. So this, I can bring it out and make it less intense just by adding more water to it. Okay, so using another piece of paper, and you can use scratch paper, or if you have additional watercolor paper that you're happy to use, just go ahead and grab it. And we're just going to kind of take a look and see, what the color looks like that I've just created. It's a really lovely green. Kind of, it's pretty washed out, which is fine. And again, if you wanted to create a darker green, you just simply add less water. So I just put this straight onto the green here, added no more water, and you can see the difference in those greens right there. Okay, so let's go ahead and play around with some of the other colors. I've got some reds, oranges, and you can choose your own palette here. Some people are wanting very vibrant pinks. I kind of like adding pink or red, really, and yellow together to make a really pretty sort of peachy color. So let's see what that one looks like. Okay, that's a little more sort of brown than I would hope for. So I'll go ahead and adjust that. Take some more pink, just a little bit. Try that again. Okay, so that is definitely the better color there. Pink, but it's more sort of a dusty sort of rose color. Exactly what I'm hoping for. Okay, and again, if you want, we're going to be using different intensities of color. So I could just go ahead and put that vibrant pink right there. That. And feel free to just kind of play around at this point. You're wanting to create your palette here just so you have an idea of the colors that you can get. And this is just really, it is a sort of a playing around moment. You can go ahead and add more color for a more intense look, and less pigment means a little more water. Just like that. See how dark that one is. I added way more water here. And then even more, I have added no more paint, just added more water. Once it dries, that will be a very, very light pink right there. Okay, so I think you get the idea. Kind of play around, see which colors you really, like. Sort of a yellowy green here. Still got a little bit of the red color in it. Okay. And again, I'm using pinks and reds, but you could use any color you wanted. It doesn't have to be a rose from nature. You could use a vibrant purple or blue if you really wanted. That's entirely up to you. I'm just kind of giving you an idea of how we're doing and how we're using these paints. So on that note, I'm going to take a little blue. Put that down here. That's a really, really lovely aqua blue color. And again, if I wanted to make this lighter, instead of adding more paint, I'm simply going to dip my brush into water, and then I've got a slightly less intense color right here. And you would do the same again if you wanted to have even less color pigment. Continue adding. The third step in creating our lovely rose is to actually just use a wash of color across the entire rose itself. And the reason is we're going to be adding layers of color, but we don't want any to stand out as just this creamy white color. So in case we miss anything, or we're not adding as much color, we want this to have some kind of a little wash of color, little highlight here, some depth. So that's why we use a wash over the entire thing before we even begin to add any additional colors. So for that, you can use a sort of medium-sized brush. It hasn't got any color from previous, and I haven't got any here, but it's a good idea to have some paper towels or a cloth, just so you can kind of take out some of the water. You don't want it completely saturated. But anyway, let's go ahead and grab some of that sort of beautiful pinky red. Again, I'm just going to kind of put it straight onto my paper here, the wax paper or parchment paper. If you have a palette, just go ahead and add it there, and then just kind of bring it out, add more water so that you've only got a very light wash of color. Okay, you don't want it too wet though, so again, if you have your paper towel, just go ahead and just use that. So I'm just gonna just very gently make that even less intense wash of color across. Adding more water is just gonna allow you to change that more intense color to very pale. Anything that looks a little too dark, you can always pick up the color just by adding water and literally picking it up with your brush. And that also goes for if you make any mistakes, you can pick up your color simply by adding more water. And lifting it off with the brush. I'm just going to keep going here, just not adding any more pigment, adding water just so I have that very pale wash of color across the entire rose. And you don't need to worry about any fine details at this point, because we're going to be adding layers of color in just a moment. We just, like I said, we just want to kind of get rid of any bright white color that would normally show. And again, I'm just taking some of that quite dark pink that I started out with and just bringing it over the rest of the rose. And you don't want to saturate this completely. Again, use your cloth or use your paper towel. We want to be able to move on with our colors. Looking pretty good. Again, just take a little more of that color that's over here and bring it over here. And as you notice, I haven't added any additional paint at this point. It's just the original color that I added to this corner and water. Bringing it all back forward. It doesn't matter if it goes outside the lines. Again, those lines, you know, the template that we're using is just that. It's just to kind of give us an idea of where to be painting. In fact, I always find it looks really nice when you see a watercolor painting and you can see it has gone outside the lines. Very pretty. Okay, so at this point, this is just our first wash of color. We're going to go ahead and just let that dry, and then the next part will be adding some details and some more intense pigment to it. Okay, so we're going to continue with our rose, and this is the part where we're adding our second layer, which is some of the fine details of the petals. So again, you've probably already decided on your palette. If not, go ahead and do that. But once you've got the colors that you're looking to use, you can just go ahead and use a number 2 paintbrush if you had one. Otherwise, just a smaller brush, because we are adding some details here.
Okay, so we just did the wash of color on the rose, and we're now going to start adding fine details. And this part of the tutorial, it's really up to you. The rose template that we're using is just for practice. Okay, this is not the end product that we're working with. So don't get too bogged down with this part of the tutorial. It's just for you to start feeling comfortable using the colors, mixing the colors, and then actually putting that color onto the paper, and then using water to spread it out. So just kind of do your own thing. You've got the the petal lines that you can see through that wash of color. You can see them. You don't have to outline every single line. Just kind of outline the parts that you want to highlight. You don't have to start where I started, and you certainly don't have to do what I'm doing. I'm just kind of playing around. So I'm just adding color where I feel like it. But you could start at the edges if you want. Some people prefer that. Some people just want to work from the middle and work their way out. It's entirely up to you. So yeah, just do what you want, get comfortable, and then in just a few moments we are going to be continuing with a freeform rose. And don't worry, again, don't worry too much about how this looks. Honestly, this rose is, it's kind of, it's actually more difficult, I think, using this template than doing your own rose from scratch, because you haven't got as much license. You're having to follow someone else's lines, basically. So yeah, but it's kind of fun. It's nice to just play around, get used to it. And as you can see, I added water. I haven't added any more color at this point. I'm just using the water to spread the that line out. We don't want a harsh line. We don't want any just obvious harsh lines on our template. Okay, so I'm just going to let you play around until we get to the next part.
Okay, so the point of this video was actually not to use the template as your final picture. What I wanted to do was get you just used to using paints, blending the colors, and what we're now doing is actually going to try a freeform rose. So if you just take a look and see what I'm doing, I'm just starting out using small strokes for the middle bud. And these are going to be the darkest part of your flower. And then just kind of sweeping out with more water on your brush. You're just gonna, you can see, just gonna go round and then around again. And don't worry about the shape at this point. You just want to sweep these sort of semicircles around that bud that you created. And we'll add more shape to it in just a moment, as well as more detail and more color. So at this point, I would just use some scratch paper, and then when you're feeling comfortable, go ahead and take your watercolor paper and try it on there. And as you can see, well, actually, as you cannot see, it looks like I've done a couple of pretty good roses right there. But it took me a long time to really get to this point. And obviously, I am not a watercolor artist. I'm just kind of showing you the very basics, and we are hoping to get you an actual local artist to do some true watercolors and to go over some of the different styles, different techniques that you can use. But again, just kind of play around. As you can see, I'm not being too structured here. I know that I can add more detail at any point, and I can change the shape of those petals. Roses, if you really take a look at them, they're not, the petals are not symmetrical. They are not necessarily rounded. They're actually, they have some points to them. So as you can see here, I'm sort of adding a little more detail, changing the um, edges so that they're just a little less rounded, a little more natural. So yeah, play around. And it doesn't have to be pink. Of course, roses come in many different colors. There's some beautiful white roses, yellow roses. Obviously, white roses isn't going to do you much good here because we have a creamy white watercolor paper, but you could definitely go for, a darker, a sort of purple rose, or really any color you prefer. And then once you've got that basic outline and you're happy with it, you can just add some water to your paintbrush and then just dot in color where you would like it. You can see that my paint and the paper is still fairly wet, so I can just add in little dots of color and they'll just kind of move freely. I can spread them around, but they'll also kind of move on for their own accord. And it just gives it a really nice, I think it gives it just a beautiful wash of color. And then, as I said, that template was just to kind of get you feeling comfortable using the watercolor. Obviously, the template itself is not a particularly great rose. I did find it from a simple watercolor book, but it's just to kind of give you the idea that you want a wash of color first, which is what we're doing even here. Even though I'm freeforming, the wash of color happens, and then you add those details, more pigment as you go along, and you can just make it more vibrant and just add in color where you see it. But again, if you see any white spaces like you can see right here as I'm painting, feel free to just add some more wash of color into those white spaces. You don't want to cover them all up, and you can see from the ones that I've already done as they dried, those colors just they look really lovely. Just the wash and then the darker colors in the middle. So try it again. I'm going to go one more time. So you can see I'm just a very basic little bud in the middle, using small lines, and then you're bringing out your brush in a sort of circular stroke. And here I've added way more water, which is fine. I wanted a lighter color, a lighter wash of color. And then you can add in more pigment as you see. But it's pretty easy. It's just that sort of curving around, and then adding more detail and adding more structure to your petals as you go along. And the trick, as I learned, is to know when to stop. I've had some roses that were huge, and just I wasn't sure when I should stop those petals. So, you know, take a look at it. Once you're happy with it, feel free to stop. You don't have to keep adding um, rose petals. And it doesn't have to be, as I said, it doesn't have to be symmetrical. Roses can be all sorts of different shapes. They're not all the same looking. So you can see quite clearly that these 3 roses that you have in front of you are fairly different, which makes it look all more natural. This one, I guess, is slightly more closed. The petals haven't opened as much as the others. And although the paint right here looks quite dark, once it dries, it will fade quite considerably, so you might even need to add another wash of color once it's dried and you look back at it. Just add some more details. I'll leave that up to you though. But I would love to see some of the beautiful watercolors that you are working on. I am a complete amateur, and I'm sure there are some much better painters out there than me, so we would love to see them, love to share them on our Facebook and Instagram page. So well, you can just simply send them to me. My email address is jpercy@libertylakewa.gov. That is jpercy@libertylakewa.gov, and I'll post them for you. We're pretty much done today. I've just shown you the very basics, as I said. Feel free to, continue exploring. I will be getting a local artist to do another class and go over some more techniques. That's it. I'm so glad you joined me today. I hope to see some of these wonderful creations and look forward to seeing you soon.